Most of us were never taught what a healthy, emotionally secure relationship actually looks like. We were taught how to survive relationships, how to please, how to avoid conflict, how to hold ourselves together so we wouldn't be abandoned. So we grow up believing that intensity is love, that anxiety is passion, and that losing ourselves is the price of connection. But a truly healthy relationship doesn't hijack your nervous system. It doesn't require you to shrink, perform, or betray your own emotional truth. A healthy, emotionally secure relationship feels safe, not perfect, not painless, but safe enough for the real you to show up. And that safety changes everything. An emotionally secure relationship is not built on constant happiness. It's built on presence. It's what happens when two people stop asking, "How do I avoid being hurt?" and begin asking, "How do I stay connected?" Even when it's uncomfortable. In these relationships, conflict is not a threat, it's information. Emotions are not weaknesses, they're messages. And boundaries are not walls, they are bridges to deeper trust. Emotional security allows you to feel without fear of punishment, to speak without rehearsing, to be imperfect without losing love. When you feel emotionally safe, your body relaxes. You no longer need to be hyper-vigilant or self-protective. And from that place of safety, love becomes spacious, not consuming. Connection becomes nourishing, not exhausting. This kind of relationship doesn't complete you. It supports you while you become more fully yourself. Let's talk about some signs of a healthy, emotionally secure relationship. First sign is that you feel safe being emotionally honest. When emotional honesty is safe, your body knows it before your mind does. There is a subtle exhale inside you, a softening. You're no longer scanning for danger in the middle of a conversation. You're no longer measuring every word, wondering how it will be received, or whether it will cost you closeness. In an emotionally secure relationship, you don't have to edit your inner experience to stay connected. Sadness doesn't make you too much. Anger doesn't make you unlovable. Fear doesn't make you a burden. Your feelings are allowed to exist without being argued away, minimized, or used against you later. This kind of safety is not about agreement. It's about attunement. When you speak honestly, you're met with presence rather than correction, with curiosity rather than defensiveness. The other person doesn't rush to fix you, silence you, or explain why you shouldn't feel what you feel. They stay with you in it. Over time, this does something profound to the nervous system. You begin to trust that expressing yourself will not lead to abandonment, punishment, or emotional withdrawal. The old survival strategies, people pleasing, emotional numbing, staying quiet to keep the peace, start to loosen their grip. Not because you forced yourself to be brave, but because your body no longer needs to protect you in the same way. Emotional honesty also becomes gentler here. You don't have to explode to be heard. You don't have to dramatize pain to make it visible. You can speak quietly and still be taken seriously. Your truth doesn't need to be loud to matter. In this kind of relationship, vulnerability is not a performance. It's not rewarded one day and punished the next. It's simply received. And that reception teaches you something many people never learned early in life, that being real does not cost you love. Eventually, honesty stops feeling like a risk and starts feeling like relief. You're not unloading emotions onto someone. You're sharing your inner world with a person who can hold it without turning away. And in that shared space, intimacy grows not from intensity, but from trust. This is what emotional safety looks like. Not the absence of discomfort, but the presence of connection, even when discomfort arises. And from that place, both people are free to be human, unfiltered, imperfect, and still worthy of care. Second is conflict doesn't threaten the bond. In an emotionally secure relationship, conflict is no longer experienced as a signal that love is about to be withdrawn. It doesn't activate the same deep fear that says, if I say the wrong thing, I could lose you. Instead, disagreement is understood as something that happens within the relationship, not something that stands against it. For many people, conflict once meant danger. Raised voices, silence, withdrawal, emotional unpredictability. So the body learned to associate disagreement with abandonment or rejection. In adulthood, that memory doesn't live in thought, it lives in the nervous system. A simple argument can feel like a threat to survival, but when a relationship is emotionally secure, conflict does not hijack the bond. There is an underlying sense of continuity. We are still here with each other, even when we're not aligned. That knowing changes everything. You don't need to defend yourself as fiercely. You don't need to win in order to feel safe. The goal shifts from being right to staying connected. This doesn't mean conflict is easy or pleasant. Emotions still rise. Old wounds still get touched. But there is a shared understanding that rupture is not failure, it's part of intimacy. And more importantly, repair is possible. Instead of withdrawal, there is return. Instead of silence, there is eventual communication. Even when space is needed, it is taken without threat. Distance is not used as a weapon. Love is not withheld to enforce compliance. Over time, the nervous system learns something new. Connection can survive discomfort. You can express anger without being abandoned. You can hear anger without needing to shut down. That learning is deeply healing, especially for those who grew up in environments where conflict meant emotional chaos or loss of safety. In these relationships, responsibility replaces blame. Each person becomes curious about their own reactions rather than focusing solely on the other's behavior. The question becomes, what is this conflict revealing about us? Instead of, who is at fault? And slowly, conflict loses its power to terrify. It becomes a doorway rather than a dead end, a place where truth can surface, boundaries can be clarified, and intimacy can deepen, not because there was no rupture, but because there was repair. When conflict doesn't threaten the bond, love stops feeling fragile. It becomes resilient, flexible, alive. You trust that even when emotions are messy, the connection itself is strong enough to hold them. Herd sign is, you are not responsible for each other's emotions. In an emotionally secure relationship, there is a subtle but life-changing distinction. You care about each other's feelings, but you don't carry them as your job. You don't confuse love with emotional management. You don't confuse connection with taking responsibility for what another person is meant to hold, process, and understand within themselves. Many of us learned early that safety depended on how well we could regulate other people. If a parent was volatile, withdrawn, depressed, or easily disappointed, a child quickly becomes sensitive to shifts in tone, mood, facial expression. They become skilled at prevention, at smoothing things over, staying agreeable, reading the room, anticipating needs, not because they're naturally selfless, but because it was a survival strategy. The child learns, if you're upset, it must be my fault. If you're unhappy, it's my job to fix it. If I take care of your emotions, I might be allowed to stay close. That training doesn't disappear when we become adults. It often becomes our definition of love. So in relationships, we may overfunction. We apologize too quickly. We rescue, we explain ourselves endlessly. We become anxious when the other person is uncomfortable. We take on guilt for feelings that aren't ours. We monitor, adjust, shape, shift, trying to keep the emotional temperature stable. Not because we're dramatic, but because an old part of the mind believes instability equals danger. Emotional security untangles that. In a healthy relationship, your partner's emotions are treated as real and valid, but not as your assignment. If they're disappointed, you can listen without collapsing into shame. If they're angry, you can stay present without panicking or becoming submissive. If they're sad, you can offer warmth without needing to fix, solve, or erase the feeling to prove your love. And the same goes in reverse. You're allowed to feel what you feel without making it your partner's obligation to regulate you. You can say, I'm having a hard day, without expecting them to become your therapist. You can ask for support without demanding they abandon themselves to provide it. Your emotions remain your responsibility, even when they are shared in a relationship. This is not coldness, it's maturity. When two people are not responsible for each other's emotions, manipulation loses its place. No one has to use guilt, silence, sulking, or emotional pressure to get their needs met. Because the relationship isn't built on emotional coercion, it's built on honest request. It also means boundaries can exist without panic. If one person needs space, it doesn't automatically mean rejection. If one person says no, it doesn't automatically mean withdrawal of love. In insecure dynamics, a boundary can feel like abandonment and trigger all kinds of protest, anger, clinginess, blame. But in secure dynamics, boundaries are understood as self-care, not disconnection. There's another profound shift here. You stop confusing empathy with self-erasure. You can deeply empathize with someone without absorbing their emotional state as your own. You can care without drowning. You can be close without losing your center. This is especially important because when we take responsibility for someone else's emotions, we often end up resentful. We may not admit it, but inside we feel used, depleted, trapped, or we feel invisible because our own needs keep getting postponed in the effort to keep the other person okay. Over time, love becomes exhaustion, and exhaustion will always eventually demand payment through resentment, distance, or collapse. Emotional security protects love from that slow erosion. It creates a relationship where both people can be human without being held hostage by each other's inner weather, where each person is encouraged to develop self-awareness and emotional skills rather than outsourcing them to the relationship. And perhaps most healing of all, when you're no longer responsible for someone else's emotions, you're free to be honest. You don't have to walk on eggshells. You don't have to hide truths to avoid upsetting them. You can say what's real with kindness, and they can feel what they feel without making it your fault. That's not just healthier, it's liberating. Because love is not meant to be a job where you manage another person's inner life. Love is meant to be a meeting place where two people take responsibility for themselves and still choose to show up for each other with compassion. And another one is boundaries are respected without punishment. In an emotionally secure relationship, a boundary does not trigger fear, retaliation, or withdrawal. It doesn't become a test of loyalty or love. When one person says no, asks for space, or names a limit, the bond itself is not put at risk. There is no silent treatment, no emotional distance meant to teach a lesson, no subtle message that closeness is conditional on compliance. For many people, boundaries were never safe. As children, limits may have been ignored, mocked, or treated as rejection. Saying no could lead to anger, guilt, or emotional abandonment. So the nervous system learned an equation that runs quietly in the background. If I set a boundary, I will lose connection. That belief doesn't vanish with age. It shows up in adult relationships as over-explaining, apologizing for having needs, or avoiding boundaries altogether. Or, on the other side, it can show up as feeling deeply hurt or enraged when someone else sets a limit because it awakens an old wound of being shut out or unloved. Emotional security changes this dynamic at its root. When boundaries are respected without punishment, limits are understood as information, not rejection. A request for space is not interpreted as withdrawal of love. A no is not heard as an attack. The relationship has enough internal stability that it doesn't collapse under the weight of individual needs. This kind of respect allows honesty to exist without fear. You don't need to brace yourself after setting a boundary. You don't scan for mood shifts or wait for consequences. The other person may have feelings about the boundary, and those feelings are allowed, but they are not used to control, shame, or coerce you into crossing your own line. That distinction matters deeply. In insecure dynamics, emotions often become tools. Disappointment becomes pressure. Hurt becomes leverage. Anger becomes a threat. The message, sometimes subtle and sometimes explicit, is, if you don't meet my needs, you will lose closeness. In emotionally secure relationships, feelings are expressed without being weaponized. Someone can say, I feel sad about this, without expecting you to undo your boundary to fix their discomfort. Responsibility stays where it belongs. Over time, this creates a profound sense of trust. You begin to believe, not intellectually, but viscerally, that you can protect your own limits and still be loved, that your autonomy does not endanger connection, that closeness does not require self-betrayal, and something else happens too. Resentment has less room to grow. When boundaries are honored, people don't have to store unspoken anger in their bodies. They don't quietly accumulate fatigue and frustration. They don't give more than they can sustain. The relationship stays cleaner, clearer, and more honest. Respecting boundaries also means allowing difference. Two people don't have to want the same level of closeness, speed, or intensity at all times. Emotional security allows for rhythm instead of fusion, for closeness and distance to exist without panic. Importantly, this respect goes both ways. You don't just feel safe setting boundaries, you feel safe receiving them. When the other person says no, you don't experience it as humiliation or abandonment. You may feel disappointed, but you don't interpret the boundary as a verdict on your worth. That ability to stay emotionally regulated in the presence of another person's limits is a sign of deep maturity and emotional grounding. When boundaries are respected without punishment, love becomes a place of choice rather than obligation. People show up because they wanna, not because they're afraid of consequences. And that kind of presence is far more meaningful than compliance ever could be. This is what turns a relationship from a negotiation of needs into a space of mutual respect, where both people can remain whole and still stay connected. And another important sign is you feel more like yourself, not less. In an emotionally secure relationship, connection does not require self-erasure. Love does not ask you to disappear, soften your edges, or become more palatable in order to stay close. Instead of narrowing who you are, the relationship creates space for you to inhabit yourself more fully. For many people, love once meant adaptation. You learn to adjust your tone, your needs, your desires, even your personality in order to be accepted. Certain parts of you may have felt welcome, your kindness, your competence, your ability to support others, while other parts learn to stay hidden, your anger, your grief, your curiosity, your ambition, your sensitivity. Over time, you might not have even noticed the shrinking. It just felt like what love required. But when a relationship is emotionally secure, that contraction begins to reverse. You notice that you're not performing as much. You're not monitoring yourself constantly. You're not asking, is this okay? Am I too much? Will this push them away? The internal vigilance softens, and in that softness, something long held back starts to emerge. Your spontaneity, your creativity, your truth. You feel more like yourself because you're not being shaped by fear. Your opinions don't threaten the relationship. Your differences don't need to be negotiated away. Your growth doesn't create competition or insecurity. Instead of feeling subtly punished for expanding, you're met with interest, encouragement, sometimes even relief, because the other person doesn't need you to stay small in order to feel safe. This doesn't mean everything is easy. Being yourself can bring discomfort, especially if authenticity was once dangerous. You may feel awkward or vulnerable at first, unsure how much space you are allowed to take. But the consistent experience of acceptance begins to rewire that old belief that love requires suppression. Importantly, this kind of relationship does not depend on sameness. You don't have to mirror each other's identities, preferences, or paths. Emotional security allows for difference without threat. One person can evolve without the other feeling left behind. One person can change without the relationship demanding a return to an earlier version. There's also a quieter sign here. You don't feel exhausted by being together. When you're not constantly managing how you're perceived, connection stops draining your energy. You leave interactions feeling more grounded rather than depleted. More connected to yourself, not less. This is especially meaningful for those who grew up in environments where authenticity came at a cost, where being real led to criticism, rejection, or emotional distance. In those contexts, the self learned to fragment, to offer only what was acceptable. An emotionally secure relationship becomes a place where those fragments can slowly come back together. And as they do, intimacy deepens. Not because you're merging into one identity, but because two whole people are meeting. Love stops being a place where you go to escape yourself and becomes a place where you can return to yourself. When you feel more like yourself in a relationship, it's not because the other person completes you. It's because they don't interfere with your wholeness. They don't ask you to trade authenticity for attachment. That is not just healthy love. That is love that allows life to move through you freely. A healthy relationship is not about finding the right person. It's about creating the right emotional conditions where love doesn't cost you your authenticity. When emotional security is present, love becomes a place you can rest, not a place you have to survive.